came across Lenore Skenazy probably 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And she was just coming off the controversy of being labeled America's worst mother, which she will tell you all about in a minute. And then she had founded, and out of that, she had founded the Free Range Kids movement. And this was a movement that was really an anti-helicopter parenting movement. And it was from her. I was greatly inspired by her. I was pretty new in my teaching career at that time. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what she had to say and the dramatic change in childhood between when I was a child and the kind of childhood kids have today. I mean, this whole, constant adult supervision piece was really not part of growing up for me. She was called America's worst mom, but, she was no different than my mom was, and probably the mothers of most of the people here at this summit. So I think this is she's an important person to listen to, and she's an important person in our field for opening doors and opening minds. One of the things I just want to point out is, she was labeled America's worst mother, but she does like to point out that her husband was not named America's worst father, which I find, that there is definitely a thread of sexism there. And that's what we do right now. And I think this is something that so many people, almost everybody in our profession are female. And so you all know this is true, is that you're held to a higher standard than men in this profession. I mean, I could just show up. Frankly, most men, we just show up and we get applauded for our efforts. Whereas women are really held to a higher standard, and somehow, someone like Lenore who gives her kids some freedom is considered a bad mother. Whereas, if a dad did it, I think generally people would say, well, that's just a dad. And we all need to be graded more on effort and more on the respect we show children and our intentions. And, maybe it'd be better if we just weren't being graded at all. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. It's an important one, and Lenore is a great person to listen to.
Welcome back to the Play Summit. And today I am so excited to introduce you to Lenore, who is known as America's Worst Mom. She was a New York City columnist turned reality TV show host, got that title after letting her 9-year-old son take the subway alone. And we're going to hear about that in a minute. In response to the enormous media blowback, she founded the book Free Range Kids, which launched the anti-helicopter parenting movement, and now has an incredible site, Let Grow. Her feisty belief that our kids are safer and smarter than our culture gives them credit for. Thank you. And I really want to
You're not even a kid.
has landed her on talk shows from The Daily Show to Dr. Phil, The View, The Today Show, NPR, Good Morning America, Nightline, ABC,
et cetera.
So
legit. Legitimacy is mine.
Owns it. Yeah. No, it's like really something to get that much media over this. Tell me about this and how all this came about.
Well, as you said, I let my 9-year-old ride the subway alone, and it wasn't even my idea. It was my son's idea, and our older son hadn't been pestering us to do the same thing. And so he calls himself the control group. So when our younger son started doing this, and note I'm saying our, because it was me and my husband who did not get the moniker America's Worst Dad. Somehow dads just get a gold star for showing up. But he and I decided that if our son really wanted to do this, we felt that he was ready. We're on the subways all the time. It's how we get around New York City. We don't have a car. And so we decided, okay. And so one sunny Sunday, I took my son, Izzy, to Bloomingdale's, which is a fancier, so I'm a thrift shop gal. Now I have to brag about everything I own that's thrift shop. And so I left him in the handbag department because that happens to be right above the subway entrance. I told him it was today. It wasn't like he was looking around like mom disappeared. Oh no. And sure enough, he went down into the subway. He took it down to 34th Street, which is the same street that you see in Miracle on 34th Street, as you might guess. And then he had to take a bus across town. And when he came into our apartment, he was like on air. He was levitating slightly above the ground because he had done something that was grown up. I mean, it was like, it's like getting married or something, it's this life stage. So he was proud and we were proud. And I was dumb because I didn't write about it for another month and a half or 2 months because it didn't strike me as a big deal. It was just part of life. But when I didn't have a column idea, and I'm a newspaper columnist, a couple months later, I wrote this piece, and 2 days later, I was on all those television shows, and had to defend myself. And that's how I got the America's Worst Mom title. But the thing that was most upsetting, I would say, about the brouhaha that happened later was, first of all, somebody called my home and said that they hoped that somebody took my children away from me. That was nice. But yeah, that was weird. But weirder, I'd say, and more persistent was the fact that on so many of these interviews, at some point, the host would go like this, or the moral equivalent of like this, and say, "But Lenore, how would you have felt if he hadn't come home?" And, I never had a good response because I think we all know how I'd have felt if he hadn't come home, and we'd be having a different conversation completely. But why did we have to go to that? I mean, like, why did we go from everything was fine to yes, but what if it hadn't been? And it took a long time for me to unpack this. But I started thinking maybe it was a way of chastising me, like I hadn't been thinking that way. And that was my crime. How dare you not think in terms of how guilty you personally would be, not only the remorse and the sorrow for losing your child, but how guilty you would be if he never came home, and let that deter you. That should be enough to say, okay, so why did you let him do anything? There's this chance that something could go terribly wrong, the worst. And so why did you not let that stop you? And to say, I'm going to trust the odds. I'm going to trust my kid. I'm going to trust my city. That's the crime now. You're not allowed to trust anything. You're not allowed to trust the statistics. You're just allowed to trust this gut feeling of terror and catastrophizing. I call it worst first thinking. You're allowed to think of the worst. You're supposed to think of the worst case scenario first and go backwards from that, as if it was inevitable. So that's the thing that I've just been thinking about for 12 years now is, how did we get to the point where you're not allowed to think normally? You have to think almost like a paranoid, terrified person to be considered a good enough parent.
It's true. It's true. I mean, seriously, the panic as a parent that we're instilled with, that we cannot trust our children even to play in their own yards anymore.
Oh, I know.
It's insanity. So
Yeah.
I know out of this, you became, what you termed a free range.
Yeah. So after, sort of being roasted in the media for a week, I started the blog Free Range Kids. And it was to say that I actually love safety. I mean, I wanted to get that out there because somehow the idea was that I was this devil may care person. And it's like, that's not me. I'm a nervous mom, and I like helmets and seatbelts and mouth guards. And I think that I am a nervous mother. I'm part helicopter on my mom's side. And so I just wanted to say that that's not why I let him do it. I am a concerned parent. I did expect him and desperately want him to come back alive even. But I just think there's something strange that has happened in our society that's making us think that our kids can't do anything safely or successfully on their own. And I'm old enough to remember that when I was a kid, at 5 years old, everybody walked to kindergarten. And when I got to the corner that you had to cross with a teeny bit of traffic, the crossing guard was another child. Was it
right? Yes.
Yeah. Remember that?
I do.
I remember it a lot, and I'll tell you why. There's one very weird thing about this in my own life, which is that the crossing guard, I married him. That's my husband, right? 33 years later. So, and it wasn't that I've been stalking him, and it wasn't that he, a man in a uniform. It was just, we figured this out years later after we got married. It's like, wait a minute, you were the crossing guard at Ramona, and look, it's like, yes, so that was me. Yeah, you crossed me. So he kept me safe so that he could marry his child bride 20 something years later. But how did we get from the time when, like, it wasn't a crazy school that let a 10-year-old wear a day glow sash and thereby have all the power to stop traffic. It was another era. And it's not like, well, things have gotten so much less safe since then. Sure enough, they were getting less safe through the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s. Crime was going up, but it's come down since then. And it's back to the level of, depending on which statistics you read, 63 or 67. And so if if you grew up going outside, if you, a parent today, grew up playing outside, riding your bike, walking to school, your kids today are safer, not from COVID, but from crime. And so how did we get to not appreciating the fact that, like, hey, these are good times. I love being outside. Let my kid be outside. It's really a conviction that there's absolutely no risk that is worth it. And anytime a child is unsupervised, that automatically registers as risk. Whereas I don't think my mom was thinking, well, I'm going to risk letting her go to school, but okay. It was just normal.
It
Really. So
was.
I'm just trying to re-normalize some faith in ourselves and our communities and our kids. It's disappeared, and it's been replaced by a lot of oversight, a lot of expensive after school programs, a lot of surveillance equipment, whether it's at the school, on the bus, or on your phone. I mean, really, we have given up freedom for ourselves to stop watching them every second, and for our kids to not be watched every second. For what? It's not for because they're living in the end times and we have to watch them more safely. It's really just because we've had the trust sucked out of us by something in society, you know, the media, the litigiousness, or just the idea that women shouldn't have so much free time. They should be spending all their time watching their kids. So it's just it's an affront. It's an affront that we've taken away the freedom of the kids, and generally we've taken away the freedom of the moms.
We have, and so much so that I think even parental rights are at stake if they would let their children. I mean, like you hear it all the time, like people reporting people,
Right.
and
I hear it all the time because everybody writes to me when they've been
wow, no,
reported.
it's serious. Like you
Yeah.
give your, a child freedom to play. Like I don't remember a story you heard about someone having their child play in the front yard. They were looking out the window, but still a neighbor called it.
Yeah, no, those stories, you might be thinking of the case of Natasha Felix in Chicago. She has three kids, 11, 9, and 5. They were playing in the park across the street. She could see them from her window, but somebody passed by and thought, those children are too young to be playing by themselves. First of all, they're not by themselves. There's three of them. Secondly,
Right.
why don't you ask, where do you live? I live across there. That's my mom in the window. She's waving. And it took years for Natasha to fight these charges of neglect. And the terrible thing is, you get put on a child abuse and neglect registry. It's not a registry that's public, but anybody who wants to employ you, I mean, we're talking to a lot of early childhood education people. If you want to work in early childhood education or anything having to do with kids, daycare, if you want to be a babysitter, if you want to be a nurse, you can't if you're on that register, and you have to fight to get yourself off it, even if the case is unfounded. And so there's just this enormous apparatus that has been sort of like weeds that are springing up and sort of choking our freedom. I mean, Natasha was a perfectly fine mom, and to be accused like that, imagine how you feel. And the statistics are shocking. I mean, what is it? It's 37% of all American kids will be reported to Child Protective Services at one point or another, and among African Americans,
Oh,
African Americans, it's 53%. So that's too much reporting. I mean, I just did a big story on this, and I can tell you more statistics, but basically about 98 out of 100 of these reports turn out to be nothing. And you could say, well, better safe than sorry. But look at Natasha, couldn't work for 2 years in her chosen field. You're living under the fear that the government is going to take your kids away. You start feeling like, am I a terrible mother? Did I put them in danger? Because we've really written, like I said before, the idea is that we should be living in a zero risk society. And we forget that there's risk in everything. If you send your kid outside, okay, there's a tiny, tiny risk that something bad will happen to them. Inside, also a tiny, tiny risk. They'll become depressed, or they'll become, obese, or they'll become diabetic because all they're doing is, sitting in front of the computer and eating Cheetos, which frankly, I do a lot of that myself. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the point is the idea that somehow if you're with your child, there's zero risk. But if you're not with your child, that is, off the charts risk, and we better start calling in CPS or the cops, which is nuts.
well, and when I was growing up, I went out by myself roaming at 3, 4, and 5 years old.
Right.
I was tossed out of the house to play.
Right.
Nothing.
And first of all, 3 sounds a little young to me, but I trust your parents, and here you are today.
I know. It's
The other
right.
thing is you're probably with a bunch of other kids,
bunch.
and what
A
we've
bunch.
taken out in the name of safety and replaced with, structured activities, boy, a 3-year-old with a 5-year-old, the 5-year-old is like, George Washington, they're so cool and they're so old, and the 3-year-old wants to keep up with them. And how do you think you build skills? I mean, your listeners know that when there's an older kid and a younger kid, the younger kid starts using more vocabulary. They learn how to hold themselves together because they don't want to be the baby who's crying. They want to be like that cool old 7-year-old,
And
And
my brother and sister were 8 and 9, so that's who I was running behind.
right. And it probably made you really smart. I mean, my sister is 5 years older than me, and she always wanted to play school. Boy, did I get A's in school. Of course I did. I was like basically tutored from the womb by my sister, who would drag me down to the basement. No, I'm friends with her now. But the point is that like kids have always played together, made up their own fun. And you might think like, okay, the little kids are getting something out of it because they're learning how to, sort of carry themselves, some executive functions, so they don't seem like babies. But the older kids, boy, so Free Range Kids grew into Let Grow, which is a nonprofit dedicated to childhood independence. And one of our school initiatives, most of the things we do are free, this one's free, is to have schools stay open before or after school for free play. And so there's an adult there, but they're not making up the games. They're not solving the arguments. They're not a coach. They're like a lifeguard. They're just standing there in case somebody's bone is poking through the skin. So there was a study done of a play club on Long Island at a grammar school, elementary school. And when the researcher told me what they'd found, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what she found out about the younger kids, but the thing that struck me is the older kids, the 4th and 5th graders, were saying things to her like, what I really liked is, my favorite part is when I would see a little kid who was, bored or nobody was playing with them, and I would tag her and I would start chasing her around the playground. Or what I really liked was getting a bunch of kids together and teaching them a game. Or what I really liked was, if a kid was lonely, I mean, it was interesting to me because what they liked was being kind. What they liked was empathy and maturity. And it almost struck me that maybe they don't have any other times when they can do this. Because if you're in your little league and it's the 10-year-olds versus the 10-year-olds, you can just see who's the best 10-year-old. But if you're a 10-year-old and you're being the monster, the fun, not scary monster to the 5-year-old, the 5-year-old is shrieking with joy, that elicits something else in you. And I worry that like maybe, we're hearing a lot of hypersensitivity today and an inability to give people the benefit of the doubt. And maybe it's because there was no chance for this spark to get lit because you weren't around kids who were so different from you in age or temperament that you started learning how to deal with each other and how to like dealing with each other and what it takes to get buy-in and what it takes to jolly somebody else along. So I'm doing that to you now because I keep shutting you up. So
No, I love that. And I want to make sure that we get the link to these programs if people want to find out more.
Oh, yeah.
I'll have them below because that's amazing to have those before and after school. I think it's a huge benefit for the youngers and the olders to be together. And
yeah.
Oh my God, I love that.
I'll tell you, so one of these schools that we interviewed kids at, this little boy, I don't know, he was probably about 8. And I said, what do you like about Play Club? And he said, well, before Play Club, I didn't have any friends. And I was like, that's not a throwaway line. That's a life completely changed. And you think about like the outcasts in some classes, like the awkward kid. Maybe it's a gay kid and they don't recognize it yet. I mean, you could be the brainiac and nobody likes you because they think you're a snob. Whatever it is, there's sometimes some kids who don't find their peeps within their own grade level. But if that kid, and I don't know what he was doing, but if he was giving piggyback rides to the kindergartners, or if he was organizing a game of duck, duck, goose, and he was the scary goose or whatever, suddenly school is completely different for him. I mean, he comes to school and instead of dreading it and knowing that he's going to be, the outsider, the kids are going like, there's Jerry, look, Jerry's here, Jerry, I'll see you at recess, or I'll see you at Play Club. I mean, why are we depriving kids of the opportunity to be part of a community and instead just making them so narrowcast that if they don't fit in, there's just no hope?
Oh my gosh. I'm feeling like every school everywhere needs a play club.
And
Seriously.
it's so easy. I mean, we have instructions and a way to explain it to parents so that the parents come and bring their kids early or let their kids stay late. And we explain it too in terms of your audience knows this, that kids learn through play. But parents have been so beleaguered by the idea that their kids must be getting academic instruction all the time or they'll never get into Harvard and then all bets are off, that we have just a nice letter that explains that after school programs for all sorts of things are great. Kids can learn chess, they can learn swimming, they can be in soccer, but this is an enrichment activity too. And people tend not to trust things that don't cost any money or that don't have a trophy or a tournament or,
Right.
a report card. And yet, so we're just trying to, we're almost not faking the advances that kids get out of play, but we are making it pretty boring and didactic. It's like children will learn the social emotional skills of empathy, cooperation, coordination, compromise. They will learn the fundamentals of democracy, which they do. I mean,
Right.
one thing that I do worry about our current democracy, which is having some problems lately, is, well, a lot of young people today did not grow up saying like, all right, who's going to be, like, let's make the teams. Wait, those teams aren't fair. And then you start playing the game and it starts to rain. Well, should we play it in the rain? And let's raise our hands. And democracy begins on the playground. Democracy begins when you and your friends want to do something and you have to figure out what to do, how you're going to do it, what are the teams, where's out, where's in, was the ball out? I mean, it's all people working together to make something happen and make something good. That's, I think the word democracy probably is that when you go back to the Latin. And if everything has been like, you guys are on these teams and these teams, okay, we're going to start when I blow the whistle, and you're in charge of the snacks, and you're in charge of second base. If it's all done by we call it a coach, but maybe it's a dictator. You don't learn what it means to make something happen, and all the pain and frustration that are inevitable but not wrong. I had a friend I'll just rattling on if I may.
No, this is really good.
Rattle
Really good.
on. So my friend Camillo took his son to an adventure playground where the parents are off to the side and the kids can hammer and nail into each other's heads practically, but it's basically very good. Kids don't get hurt. And Camillo's on the outskirts and it's like time to go already. And he told his son, he said, hey, you've been here for 2 hours. We got to go home. And his son said, but Dad, we were just about to start a war. So first of all, I don't think it's bad that they were starting a war. That's a fun war. But it also shows that 2 hours of back and forth and what are the rules and, forget it, that's too far and I can't do that. Negotiations were a sort of a top-heavy part of playing. And if the parent were in there, or certainly if a coach were there, it would be like, cut to the chase. You guys are, you're wasting all your time. You have 2 hours. Let's start playing. And that sort of misses the point of why play is this drive installed in all people, and actually all species, by Mother Nature. And it's to get us to do the tough things, to hold ourselves together and to say, okay, you can go first, which is compromise, and to deal with the frustration of losing. I mean, all these things that are inevitably part of play are things that are difficult to get, certainly through a worksheet, and they're difficult to get if it's like at work. But if your goal is to play, your goal is to have fun, that goal is so worth it that you are willing to do all this interpersonal, social, emotional work. And so I'd say that adults look at that and they think like, this is a waste of time. You're supposed to be playing. That is play. The fun part of play is like the reward, right? But most of play is, how come you're always Batman and I'm always Robin? Let's switch it up. And so when adults are organizing play, it's sort of like when adults organize trunk or treat at Halloween. Have you heard of trunk or treat?
Yes.
Right? You want to tell your viewers who might not know what trunk or treat is?
Yeah, so it's like where you, in Oklahoma, where I've said it's literally you're just going to go into like a church or a big gymnasium and you just walk around and people just feel like there's no knocking, there's no, it's just, it's,
It's
it's another function of safety, right?
It is another function of safety, and it is it's an adult's idea of what Halloween is. It's candy, right? So you're getting candy, so that should be enough. Generally trunk or treat has a trunk, so it's cars in a big church parking lot or a rec center parking lot. All make a big circle with the trunks facing in to the center, so nobody can get out. And then you have your kids go, and I always think this is the worst idea. So remember, children, if anybody ever offers you candy from a trunk, go to. It's like, I'm not sure that's the best advice. But so they go from trunk to trunk to trunk. It takes about 20 seconds. And, you grab your candy. And to the adult eye, Halloween has served its function. Children are going home now with candy. But to the kid, what you've lost out on is the independence of going around your neighborhood, getting to know your neighborhood, being scared to, press the doorbell on the kind of spooky house, going with your friends and saying, like, should we skip this one? Or let's go to the fancy neighborhood where they're going to give full candy bars. The idea of being out at night without an adult and being brave enough to do that. And once you've done that, that's like climbing the Himalayas, taking all those real experiences out of kids' lives and saying, like, well, you got your candy. Or it's like, why did you waste all that time organizing the game? Why didn't you just play the game? Adults are missing the point. There's so much more to childhood than the candy and the actual ball game. And to pretend that there's not is to really leave kids without all these experiences that build them into who they are. I'm the kid who tripped on Halloween and everybody got ahead of me and then I had to run after them and I lost my sword and I had to go back. I mean, there's experiences and there's challenges, and if you take them all out and say, well, that should be enough, it's not. It's not. Really not.
Well, and when you were talking, I remember so much at 5 years old with the neighborhood kids. 90% of our time was negotiating what we're going to do or talking under a tree. And then we would kind of huddle over and then we'd be under a bush doing this same thing. We just move our location. And how much I see that, especially in kindergarten, when I taught kindergarten, they're to hit a certain point in the year where they started negotiating what they were going to do and how they were going to play, right? And so it's a real stage. And like, I just got it on a level I haven't gotten it before, that this is a really crucial part of play, why, when we set up like what is termed hands-on learning, which is really teacher guided activities versus giving them open-ended play, where the conflict comes, it's because they're negotiating the room. And I never have population control because that takes away choice, right?
What's it called? Population
control. Yeah, it's a big thing. And especially when I first started teaching, it was the rage.
It sounds like birth control. What are you talking about?
It's like saying, okay, in blocks only 5 people, in art only 2 people, how many, versus like if, I've had centers where I have 15 kids going to blocks. And then there's something to negotiate and there's certain breakdown. And yes, conflict rises, but why is this bad? And you're really giving another complete view of it. For me, it was just, I want to welcome conflict because this is the place we learn how to vocalize and talk to each other. But at the same time, the negotiation part, it's just as important.
Well, the negotiation comes because there is conflict. If everybody agreed, you wouldn't have anything to negotiate.
Yeah, to really, it's not so much from how to it's not about the peacemaking. It's about the skills of relationship.
It is. So Penny Wilson, who's a play worker in England, you know her? Yeah. So she uses this phrase. You probably don't want to use it with like the parents coming in to find out if they like your center or not, but she calls fun the orgasm of play, which is that it is so great to get to that point that you're willing to, buy the flowers and the chocolate. No, you're willing to, sit there and figure out the rules and let the other person go first, or get them use the big blocks, and you'll just put the things on the side. You'll be the tree, they get to be the knight. So it's Mother Nature made play fun enough, made the drive for fun is sort of like the drive to procreate, right? It's this
Yeah.
innate desire. I must play, and to thwart it is to denature kids. And to a certain extent, at Let Grow, we think that it's possible that kids are growing anxious and depressed, and those numbers are literally going up. And we certainly see a certain fragility in a lot of young people today at work or on campus. And we think it's because they missed out on this foundation of learning to be frustrated, learning to deal with a jerk, learning to make alliances, learning to advocate for themselves. If there's always an adult saying, okay, you're going to play this team, or you're supposed to always go to an adult if you feel like you've been, hurt or dissed. Bullying seems to have been defined down to like, he called me a doo-doo head, which seems like it's eternal. So if there has always been an adult mediating, and in fact, you've been told to always have an adult come and solve your arguments for you. And parents have been told this too, that they should always be jumping in. And my favorite example of this is that Parents Magazine had an article on how to have the perfect play date, which is already a bad idea. And one of the questions was, my child is old enough to stay home alone some of the time, and often does when I do an errand, but now she has a play date over. Can I still run to the dry cleaner? And Parents Magazine, which is a lot of us depend on because we're not living necessarily with grandma or an extended family. And Parents Magazine said, absolutely not. You must be there all the time because, first of all, someone could get hurt. So they're telling you, first of all, once again, this catastrophizing, worst first thinking, somebody could get burned, somebody could get hurt physically. But then it also said, you want to be able to, what if there's a spat? You want to be able to jump in before anyone's feelings get hurt. And to me, that's a terrible template for your job as parent, to assume that your kid can't even have an argument with her friend that she has over without it being so difficult and traumatic that if you don't jump in, first of all, she won't be able to solve it. And secondly, she'll never be able to overcome it. So I feel like we've written so much of childhood in terms of these giant traumas. They're going to be kidnapped. They're going to be, psychically wounded. They're going to lose a friend. They're going to start hating themselves, that we take out, once again, all these experiences. I always think of it as like, we thought that white bread was the best, because we took out all the husk and the grain and the germ or whatever. And finally, it's like this fluffy white bread. But actually, it turns out that having the chewier, harder stuff that maybe some of us break our teeth on, but for the most part, our system expects it. And to have taken it all out is to make it sort of this glutinous glob of glug that's going through us. And similarly, we've taken out these experiences from childhood and replaced it with, perfection, a smoothie of existence, and that turns out to be not nutritious enough for a child to build up this, to become robust. So it all feels like it's part of the same thing. You got to trust your kids and sort of trust Mother Nature that the drive to play is in there, the curiosity is in there. To a certain extent, you just have to step back, and it's hard to step back as you're watching them argue and you're watching them bicker and not get anything done. So that's why it's good to not even be there. Right? Because if you watch, you're going to want to jump in. It's inevitable. It's so painful to see your kid not getting their way and being frustrated, and that kid is being a jerk, and why isn't my son standing up for himself? Get out of the way, and you don't have to watch them do it, and then they will start building up that whole grain existence of dealing with what's coming at them.
Yeah, it's so interesting that there's such a drive to remove any risk from childhood. We can talk about risk taking is a huge thing in early childhood, that we set up our environments and the regulations so there's no risk, yet children need to try climbing things and jumping. And I remember my son at 4 and 5, he was, a daredevil. He still is, but, he loved to push it a little, and he ended up getting a lot of body wisdom from that.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm also hearing this emotional, like we're treating children as these fragile little glass dolls or something.
Right. The glass menagerie, right.
Like if I treat my child with they're so fragile, then how can they possibly be ready to meet the workplace? Where as adults, there's still a lot to navigate here.
Oh my God. I hate to say I'm still navigating it. I thought it would get easier like in one of these decades,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so how important it is to give trust. And I love that you brought trust, because that was the thought I kept going, like, we're not trusting children's, who they are. We're holding them as partial people rather than full human beings, capable and actually wired for this.
It's funny you mentioned wiring, because that reminds me of, so Peter Gray, who I think you have at this conference as well, is one of the co-founders of Let Grow with me. And he talks about, so when a baby's born, they can learn any language. If my baby was born in China, he'd be speaking Chinese, and he's born in America, so he can't speak anything except English, because that's our credo, right? Certainly everybody better speak what we speak. But the point is that they come prepared for experiences and language and lessons that life will give them and that they need. And one of the things they come wired to, the brain is expecting conflict, expecting some betrayals and some confusion and some risk and some fear and some disappointment. And to keep taking all those out, my older son, I'm here at my summer cabin when I can't find it anymore, but he had won a trophy for 8th place in the teen bowling league out of 9 teams. And and the insult inherent in that trophy, I don't think that I would have gotten a trophy for 8th place out of 9 teams. I don't think anybody in the history of the world until now got that kind of thing. And so what is it saying? It's saying that I don't think that first of all, I don't think you have any clue that you are terrible at bowling. Just don't look around. You'll get upset. You won't be the best. You'll feel bad. And we better not let you feel bad, because that's the wrong thing. You should only be feeling good about yourself. And look, you tried so hard and you almost made it to 7th place. So what is it that we're saying? We're saying that we don't think kids can handle anything. And then the brain doesn't get those chances to go home without the trophy, to not get your way, to get lost. I feel bad with all the technology that allows kids to be constantly in touch with their parents, because it takes away opportunities for them to figure things out on themselves. There was an article the other day about, it was either in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, about giving your kid some kind of phone or some kind of, GPSing device or whatever that allowed you to give them an old-fashioned free-range childhood. And the example from one woman who sounded like, she's a normal mom these days. She said, I'm so glad, because this way she can have all the freedom she wants. And the other day when her bike broke, she could call her dad and he came immediately to fix it. And I'm like, Dad came and fixed it. That does not strike me as anything. There was no chance for her then to figure it out, to wheel home a broken bike, or to get down and try to figure out, well, if I put the chain here, does that work? There was a concierge on call who happened to be Dad, who came, and when you think of what is a concierge, it's the guy at the hotel, and you're in a fancy hotel in a new town, and you go down and you say, what's a good restaurant? And he says, oh, I would recommend Letesse, and I will call you a cab. And a cab comes and it whisks you to Letesse, and the concierge had said, don't forget to order the duck, and you order the duck, and sure enough, it's fabulous. And then you go back home. And what you didn't do was, wander around, get lost, go into the tiny tortilla place, order something there. The mother comes out and she bounces her baby, and you get to meet little, whoever it is, Pablo, and you have this fabulous meal, and you've made a new friend, and you go back and you go the wrong direction, and then you come across the dancing class in the middle of the square, and then finally you wind your way home, and you pass a guy, selling wine. I'm making this all up, but the point is that there's an enriched life out there if somebody isn't fixing everything for you and making it perfect. Right. And so even the technology that I know it's very hard to resist, changes childhood and it puts you in the driver's seat or in the biker's seat. And I think once again, that's taking something away. Those experiences that your brain is expecting to be wired by don't happen.
I think it's overwhelming to think about how far we've come in the bubble world. And now with the pandemic, that.
Yeah, I think the pandemic to me is horrible because it's a pandemic, but really interesting in terms of what parents are letting their kids do, because parents are at their wits' end. A lot of them either have lost their jobs or are working from home. The kids are with them for 24 hours a day, which used to totally not be the case. You would send them to something, whether it was school or an after school activity or daycare, they were out of your hair for part of the day. And now they're there all the time. And the parents are finally going, okay, take your bike, go out. Or the kids are saying, please, can't I go outside? And it's like, well, I do have this, Zoom meeting with Sally. And so, yeah, okay, go outside. And I'm seeing a lot more independence because the kids are bored. So, and the parents are frantic. Well, what a great combination. Can you make dinner? Can you run and run this errand for me? So we did a survey, Let Grow did a survey. Here are the results. Asking parents whether their kids were doing, were they doing new things on their own? And the answers were overwhelmingly yes. Way more kids were helping out around the house. And my favorite, we asked kids, we gave them all these different adjectives, like 10 different adjectives. How do you feel now? Bored, confident, excited, lonely, smart, sad, angry. And number one was bored, which should not surprise anyone. But because you're bored, you end up doing something because it's too painful to be bored, right? It's a painful thing. Think of all those horrible college classes where you just were jumping out of your skin that I always go back to. So the number two adjective was happy, and the bottom adjective was sad. And I think that's because out of boredom, they said, well, I wonder how I do make breakfast. I wonder how I do macrame. I wonder how let me start. One guy we interviewed for this said that he started playing guitar because he was so bored. He started taking lessons from YouTube, basically. And he said, the funny thing is I had two guitars already. I just had never played them. But the combination of all this free time and everybody else is distracted, well, I better start finding something within myself that's interesting enough to me to do. So to me, it has not been, I would never call it a blessing, but there have been some silver linings in terms of childhood.
Yeah, exactly. And, what would you say to parents considering homeschooling?
Well, first of all, you're doing that now, see how you like it. I mean, really, I'd say that I'm totally agnostic. I think that I sent my kids to New York City public school. So I think public school, private school, charter school, homeschool, unschool, thank God nothing is shoved down your throat, and you can figure out what makes sense for you, for your kid. It might be, so many things are a la carte now. You might have your kid home for a couple of years, and then they go to school, and then they hit a snag, or you move or something, and you don't like the schools in the neighborhood. You don't have to do one straight line anymore. It's sort of like it used to be. If you handed in a resume to a new job and you'd gone from X to Y to Z, they'd think like, why are you so flighty? And now it's like, okay, everybody's doing so many. It's a much more mosaic-y life for most of us now, that I think I don't think you should feel bad if you decide to do homeschooling, or if you decide not to do homeschooling, and you can toggle.
Right. I think that's such a good point. And it won't make a difference in the long run. Like you said, they're not going to look at where did you go to school. I had friends who homeschooled their children through high school who got into Stanford and, major universities accept homeschool children. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what's kind of cool right now. It is a very smorgasbord of life out there.
It is. So what would you recommend, or what would you think we could be doing as early childhood educators and parents to spark a revolution of trust in children, and a little, even just a little more risk taking, in negotiating and play, in making choices?
Right. First of all, I just have to say this sentence that I heard the other day that I'd heard before, but that I'd forgotten. And I'm surrounded by a lot of kids this summer, and it strikes me as so key. And that is, never try to make a happy child happier. You see this, it's like the kid is, twirling around on the grass, and then the parent will come and hold their hands and swing them around on the grass. It's like the kid was twirling around on the grass. That's fine. It doesn't have to go to 11, right?
Right.
Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you don't have to entertain them. Some of the time it can get too painful to listen to them whining, or that you've been on your Zoom calls from 9 to 4, and you do want to pay some attention. But there is something to be said for, like I was just saying, these, the kids are bored and then they're happy, and they get from one to the other by finally becoming resourceful enough to start playing with the blocks, and then they're involved in it, or start playing with the the paint set or whatever, in a room that's not your living room. And certainly something that helps in terms of being able to step back and just let them do some more is loose parts. It's a phrase that I'm sure everybody on this seminar has heard a million times, but loose parts don't have to be deliberate loose parts. They don't have to be, paintbrushes and clay. They can be an old suitcase. They can be scraps of fabric. They can be whatever you have in your basement or your attic, or that you pull out of the dump, that is battered, and so it can get battered some more and nobody's going to care. They can paint on the backpack if they want. They can glue rocks to the backpack. So I'd say having interesting materials that aren't off limits for the kids, and then of course a place that they can use them. And if you have an outdoor space, how great. And if you don't, and you can just make a little demarcated space where go to town, kids. I think that that's really helpful. I think kids love, they love the same things that they've always loved: blocks and the play kitchen, and a lot of paper.
The loose parts. I think what I love about loose parts is just like being bored. It's not doing the work for them.
Mm-hmm.
That they have to decide, what am I going to do with this, and how am I going to, what is it going to become, or how am I going to utilize it? And so out of it, they're negotiating the materials for what can I do. And I think that's so important for their growth,
Right. So Susan Lin, who started the organization called the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood, and she wrote a book called The Case for Make-Believe. She says that the best toy, and you probably know this already too, is 90% kid. So holding up a rubber band, is it, something to, ouch, something to hurt yourself with, or something to hurt your brother with? It could be both, but it could also hold back your hair, and you could also link it together and make it into a jump rope. I mean, as opposed to, my kids once got from a friend, like the Star Wars light up battleship that would all, suddenly turn itself on in the middle of the night and terrify us all. But it was like, it would say 15 things, and it would light up and it would spin. And it's like, all you could do was, it was like watching TV. It would do stuff. It would make sounds. It would make light. And, if you touched it too much, it would break. So
Exactly.
that seems like, that doesn't seem like a really fun toy. It seems like a paperweight, something you can look at. So.
And I think it's what the other thing about loose parts, and in my years of working with children, and that is many times they're so excited by a creation, and they bring it to you and it looks like a pile of nothingness, but they're like, look, I made a battleship, and you're like, but it's just garbage glued together.
Right.
That I think it's really powerful that in their feeling for what they've created out of that, stop. That not to intervene and go, it would look more like a ship if you did this to it. To honor their work as well. I think sometimes it, I don't know how many times you've seen, for me, like when there's a project that a child like in 4th grade has to do, like create a diorama of when the first settlers came to the U.S. and and you go to the school and you can see which ones the parents did it for them. I mean, it's so clear. And the child then becomes this pitiful thing because all the parents are competing, like, wow, Susie's mom's got it going on. Look, she must be an artist. But I think it's really sad that it's become so, we intervene so much in the children's work and don't honor where they're at.
Right.
So
So I think
hands off.
the overarching thing that we're both talking about is actually Let Grow has its new slogan, which is when adults step back, kids step up. You know, when there's
Wow.
adults with kids, adults are the adults and the kids are the kids. Okay, you're going to do it this way here. Don't use yellow, use blue. But when there's no adults there, that's when the kids start becoming the adults, right? They are organizing their time, they're figuring out their problems, they're making their friends. And so we want that to happen. You know, you want that to kick in. Ironically, wanting it so much to happen so that you're there to make it perfect turns out to be the opposite, right? The woman I work with, Tracy, who's so wonderful, came up with a phrase I also love, which is treating children as fragile makes them fragile, right? Like, oh, I'll do that for you. Oh, don't say that. Oh, you know, that wasn't nice. You know, don't do this to her. Let them fight some of their own battles. And nothing, I'm not talking about persistent bullying or anything awful that obviously requires adult intervention. I'm talking about the everyday give and take, which is so annoying sometimes to listen to. And sometimes it's funny, but sometimes it's painful. And like, remember that those wires have to get knit in the brain for the brain to be able to handle all the other, you know, confusion, risk, disappointment, and fun stuff that is coming their way.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a rich conversation. So tell us how we can find Let Grow and some of the resources we might find there.
Sure. Thank you. So Let Grow is just LETGROW. It's not Let's Go. It's not Let It Grow. Bad. That'd be a terrible name. It's not Let's Grow. It's just Let Grow. So you go to letgrow.org, and there we have a lot of do-it-yourself ideas. We have testimonials from parents. We have printables, you know, 15 things you can say instead of be careful, like you can do it and try again. And if you go on Facebook, we're also there as Let Grow. I think it's letgrow.org. And there's also a page called No More Helicopter Parents, which is just a sort of give and take page. I can't get my 7-year-old off the couch. You know, what does anybody suggest? I got screamed at because I let my 5-year-old cross the street. Anybody, you know, think that I was crazy or sane? So there's that. And then if you're a teacher, Let Grow has these 2 projects that are for elementary schools and can be for younger kids. One is the Let Grow Play Club. You can download the materials online. And one is the Let Grow Project, which is a homework assignment for kids, really for adults, that the kid goes home and the assignment is, Mom, it says I have to do something by myself without you, something new. And then we have a list of tons of things. You can climb a tree, you can make a pancake, whatever it is. But because it's the school is suggesting this as a good exercise, and then we give all the reasons, you know, social emotional growth and learning to take risks and be wise and whatever we say, it's all true. But the point is then parents don't feel like they're crazy or bad to let their kid walk with another friend to the store or play outside. And so sometimes you need to know that you're not the only one, that this is socially acceptable, that everyone at the school is doing it, that it's actually good for your kids, you know, brain and social emotional development. And so the Let Grow project in schools changes a whole school, can sometimes change a whole community. We've heard great stories about like where all the kids are outside again now, because not all the kids, but a bunch of kids are outside again now because the barrier was broken. And like we were talking about when you were 3, 4, 5, you were playing outside. Now that's considered weird and abnormal. But we're hoping to make it normal again because it's so good for kids and it was taken away for no good reason.
Absolutely. I'm going to put the links below so people can just click and come to you. Thank you so much for sharing. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. This was really fun. You get me going, I have to say. So thanks.
Oh my gosh. Well, what you're sharing is really eye-opening and sobering to hear. You know, I mean, part of me wants to cry.
Funny to hear. Don't be sober. Be Chad.
But that, you know, children today, you know, even from my own children don't have are even more insulated and bubbled. And, you know, I really think that while we're not going to let go of safety, we can allow more risk taking.
Right. And risk doesn't mean risky, you know, risky behavior is terrible, but taking little risks, it's a risk every time you walk out the door. So just recognize that there's no such thing as no risk.
Right. And and I love that you're bringing it's not just physical, it's also emotional. Giving your child a little more risk, stand back, let your child, or let the students in your classroom work it out.
Right, right, right. When adults stand back, kids step up.
But I love that. What a brilliant.
I think it's step up. Adults step back, kids step up. Whatever. It's on our site.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much. And I know people will be coming to your site, and I love your play club. I think it's something every school should adopt.
I hope they do. And listen, send me stories. If you're a school that does do the play club, if there's ever school again, or if you do the Let Grow project, I'm Lenore at letgrow.org. Feel free to send me a picture, a story. I'd love to hear from you. I mean, I really do. I cherish when people give me feedback and I get to see what's going on.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
Hehehehe